The sleek glass doors of Thompson Enterprises swung open as a small girl with bright eyes and a worn-out backpack stepped into the towering building. Her name was Lily, just 7 years old, with untamed curls and a determined look that seemed out of place on such a young face. She clutched a crumpled photograph in one hand and a small stuffed rabbit in the other. The lobby buzzed with activity, men and women in expensive suits rushing past, the click-clack of heels against marble floors, phones ringing in the distance. Lily stood there, taking it all in, gathering her courage. "Can I help you?" A woman at the reception desk peered down at her, confusion evident in her expression. Children weren't common visitors at the corporate headquarters. "I need to see Mr. Thompson," Lily said, her voice small but steady. "It's important." The receptionist smiled kindly. "Do you have an appointment, sweetie? Mr. Thompson is a very busy man." "No," Lily admitted, "but I came a long way." "Please." Upstairs on the 40th floor, Robert Thompson was in the middle of a crisis. At 45, he had built his tech company from nothing into a billion-dollar enterprise. Today, his piercing blue eyes were fixed on quarterly reports that showed a concerning dip in profits. His dark hair, peppered with gray at the temples, was slightly disheveled from running his hands through it in frustration. "These numbers are unacceptable," he said to the roomful of executives. His voice wasn't raised, it never was, but it carried the weight of disappointment that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats. His assistant, Priya, knocked softly before entering the boardroom. "I'm sorry to interrupt, sir," she said hesitantly, "but there's a situation downstairs." Robert barely looked up. "Handle it." "It's a little girl, sir. She's insisting on seeing you personally. Says she won't leave until she does." This caught his attention. He glanced up, brow furrowed. "A child? Whose child?" "She won't say, sir. Just that it's important and private." Robert sighed, checking his watch. "Tell security to escort her out. I don't have time for this." Priya nodded and left. Robert returned to the meeting, but something nagged at him. A child coming alone to see him? It was unusual enough to be concerning. Downstairs, 2 security guards approached Lily. "I'm sorry, miss, but Mr. Thompson can't see you today," one of them said gently. "Maybe you could come back another time with your parents?" Lily's lower lip trembled, but she stood her ground. "But he is my parent," she whispered, clutching the photograph tighter. The guard exchanged a glance with his colleague. "What did you say?" "He's my dad," Lily said a little louder. "My mom told me before she went to heaven." The guards looked at each other again, unsure how to proceed. One of them crouched down to Lily's level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily. Lily Chen." The name Chen sent a jolt through the security guard. He had worked for Thompson Enterprises for over a decade and remembered the rumors from years ago about Robert's relationship with a woman named Chen. "Wait here," he told Lily, then stepped aside to make a call. Minutes later, Priya returned to the boardroom, looking even more uncomfortable than before. "Sir, I'm really sorry, but the situation downstairs, it's gotten complicated." Robert's patience was wearing thin. How complicated can a lost child be? "Call her parents. She says." Priya hesitated, glancing at the other executives. "She says you are her parent, sir. Her name is Lily Chen." The room fell silent. Robert's face drained of color at the mention of the surname. 8 years ago, he had a relationship with Anna Chen, a brilliant software engineer who worked for a rival company. When things got serious, he ended it abruptly. His career was taking off, and he wasn't ready for commitment. He hadn't heard from her since. "That's impossible," he said flatly, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sir, security thought you should know. They're asking what to do." Robert stood up suddenly. Meeting adjourned. We'll continue tomorrow." Without another word, he strode out, leaving his stunned executives behind. In the elevator down, Robert's mind raced. This had to be some kind of scam. Anna would never keep something like this from him. Would she? Their breakup had been ugly, he'd made it clear he wanted no contact. Had she respected that wish even when it came to his own child? The elevator doors opened, and there she was, a small figure sitting on one of the lobby's plush sofas, legs dangling, not quite reaching the floor. Something about her profile made Robert's heart skip a beat. As he approached, she looked up, and he saw Anna's eyes staring back at him. "Are you Mr. Thompson?" Lily asked, sliding off the sofa and standing up straight. "I am," he replied, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "And you're Lily?" She nodded, studying his face with intensity. Then, without warning, she thrust the photograph toward him. "This is you with my mom. She said to give it to you." Robert took the photograph with unsteady hands. It showed him and Anna at a company picnic years ago, both laughing. He remembered that day. It was before things got complicated, when they were just happy. "Where is your mother, Lily?" he asked, though something in him already knew the answer. "She got really sick," Lily said matter-of-factly, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Cancer. She died 3 weeks ago." Robert felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Anna, gone? It seemed impossible. She had been so vibrant, so full of life. "The social worker said I have to live with my closest relative now," Lily continued. "Mom said that's you." The lobby suddenly felt too small, too public. Robert looked around, aware of curious glances from employees and visitors. "Let's go somewhere private to talk," he said, guiding Lily toward a small conference room off the main lobby. Once inside, Robert tried to collect his thoughts. "Lily, this is very unexpected. Did your mother leave any documentation? Any letters explaining?" "She wrote you this," Lily said, pulling an envelope from her backpack. "And the social worker has papers. She's waiting for you to call her." Robert took the envelope, his name written in Anna's familiar handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment before setting it aside, unopened. "How did you get here today?" he asked. "The social worker brought me. She's outside in the car. She said I should talk to you first, by myself." Robert nodded, fighting the urge to open the letter right then. "And where have you been staying since your mom passed away?" "With Mrs. Garcia, our neighbor. But she's old and can't keep me." Lily's voice was steady, but her fingers fidgeted with the worn stuffed rabbit. "Mom said you're rich and have a big house. She said you might be surprised to see me, but that deep down you're a good person." The word stung. Had Anna really believed that, after how things ended between them? Or was it just something she told their daughter to give her hope? "Lily, I need to be honest with you," Robert said slowly. "I didn't know about you. Your mother and we lost touch many years ago." "I know," Lily nodded. "Mom said you were very busy becoming important." There was no accusation in her tone, just acceptance, which somehow made it worse. "Can I stay with you?" she asked directly. "I don't have anywhere else to go." Robert felt panic rising in his chest. Him, father to a 7-year-old? It was absurd. His life was boardrooms and business deals, not bedtime stories and school lunches. He lived alone in a minimalist penthouse that had never heard a child's laughter. "It's not that simple," he said. "There are procedures, legal considerations. And my lifestyle, it's not conducive to raising a child." Lily's face fell, but she nodded as if she'd expected this answer. "Mom said you might say that. She said to tell you it's okay, and that she's sorry for bothering you." The resignation in the little girl's voice made something twist painfully in Robert's chest. She was preparing to be rejected, preparing to walk away from her only remaining parent without a fight. "Wait," he said, more sharply than he intended. "I didn't say no. I just need time to figure this out." Hope flickered across Lily's face. "Really?" "Yes, really." Robert took a deep breath. "Let me talk to the social worker and read your mother's letter. Then we'll see what happens next." "Okay," Lily said. Then, after a pause, "Mom also said you might need to remember how to smile. She said you used to have a nice one." Despite everything, Robert felt his lips twitch upward. "Your mother always did have a way of calling me out." As they walked back through the lobby, Robert was acutely aware of the small figure beside him, of how fragile and brave she seemed all at once. Outside, a woman in a sensible suit stood next to a car, relief washing over her face when she saw Lily. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Gloria Wells from Child Protective Services. I see you've met Lily." Robert shook her hand, still feeling like he was moving through a dream. "Yes, we've met. Though I'm still processing everything." "Understandable. Perhaps we could schedule a proper meeting to discuss the situation?" Actually, Robert found himself saying, "I'd like to hear about the options now." "Lily mentioned she's staying with a neighbor temporarily." "Yes, but that arrangement ends tomorrow," Ms. Wells explained. Without a family member willing to take custody, Lily would enter the foster care system. Robert looked down at Lily, who was trying very hard to appear brave. The thought of this child, possibly his child, being passed to strangers made something protective stir within him. "That won't be necessary," he heard himself say. "At least, not yet. I need to verify paternity, of course, but until then, she can stay with me." Ms. Wells looked surprised. "That's unusually quick." "Are you certain?" "Was he?" "No, not at all." But looking at Lily's hopeful face, he couldn't bring himself to send her away. Not before he'd even read Anna's letter, not before he'd given this situation the consideration it deserved. "I'm certain I don't want her in foster care if there's an alternative," he said firmly. "I have plenty of room and resources to ensure she's properly cared for while we sort this out." As Ms. Wells began explaining the temporary custody paperwork, Robert felt his phone vibrating. The board members, his assistant, the crisis he'd left behind, all demanding his attention. For the first time in his career, he let the calls go to voicemail. Instead, he watched as Lily petted a dog passing by on a leash, her face lighting up with a simple joy that seemed foreign in his world of complex business maneuvers. What had his life become that the presence of a child felt so disruptive? When had he decided that success meant isolation from anything messy, anything unpredictable? As the day wound to a close, Robert found himself leading a small girl into his spotless penthouse apartment, both of them unsure what came next. "Is this all yours?" Lily asked, eyes wide as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Yes," Robert replied, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes, beautiful but sterile, impressive but uninviting. "Where are all your things?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "My things are everywhere." "No," Lily shook her head, "your things. Pictures and treasures and stuff that makes you happy when you look at it." Robert had no answer for that. When was the last time he'd kept something simply because it made him happy? As Lily carefully set her stuffed rabbit on the pristine coffee table, the first personal touch his apartment had seen in years, Robert finally opened Anna's letter, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't prepared for the journey that awaited him, for how one small visitor would turn his carefully constructed world upside down, or for the painful truth he would soon discover about the daughter he never knew he had. Robert sat at his kitchen island, reading Anna's letter for the third time as dawn broke over the city skyline. Sleep had eluded him all night. In the guest bedroom down the hall, Lily slumbered peacefully, unaware of the turmoil her arrival had caused. The letter was typical Anna, straightforward, without blame or unnecessary emotion. Robert, asterisk. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Lily has found her way to you. I never told you about her because you made it clear your career came first, and I respected your choice. Perhaps that was wrong of me. She deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know your daughter, asterisk. DNA will confirm what your eyes probably already have, she is yours. I've enclosed all her medical records and important documents. She's bright, kind, and stronger than any child should have to be, asterisk. I don't ask for your love, just your consideration. If you truly cannot take her, please ensure she goes to a good home. But before you decide, give her a chance. Give yourself a chance. Parenthood wasn't in your plans, but it might be the best detour you never expected, asterisk. Anna, asterisk. Robert set the letter down and rubbed his tired eyes. The DNA test would take a few days, but in his heart, he already knew. Lily had his mother's chin, his own way of furrowing her brow when concentrating. Last night, watching her carefully arrange her few belongings in the guest room, he'd seen flashes of himself in her methodical precision. His phone buzzed with a message from Priya, board emergency meeting called for 9 a.m. Everyone demanding explanations about yesterday. Reality was crashing back in. He had walked out on a crucial meeting, left dozens of calls unanswered, all because of a child he hadn't known existed 24 hours ago. The company wouldn't run itself, and he had responsibilities to shareholders, employees, clients. "Good morning," a small voice said from the doorway. Robert looked up to see Lily standing there, still in her clothes from yesterday, her hair a tangled mess. It struck him suddenly that he had nothing for a child in his home, no appropriate food, no change of clothes, not even a proper toothbrush. "Good morning," he replied, attempting a smile. "Did you sleep okay?" Lily nodded. "Your house is very quiet. No street noise like at home." "It's the triple-pane windows," Robert explained, then immediately felt foolish. What 7-year-old cared about window specifications? An awkward silence stretched between them. "Are you hungry?" he finally asked. "A little," she admitted. Robert opened his refrigerator, revealing its sparse contents, some protein shakes, leftover takeout, and a bottle of expensive champagne. He hadn't properly grocery shopped in months, he usually ate at restaurants or ordered in. "How about we go out for breakfast?" he suggested. "Then we can buy you some essentials." Lily brightened. "Can we get pancakes? Mom used to make smiley face pancakes on special days." "Sure," Robert agreed, though he couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something as frivolous as a smiley face pancake. After a quick stop in his bathroom to help Lily brush her teeth with a spare adult toothbrush, they headed out. Robert was painfully aware of how ill-prepared he was for this situation. At the breakfast diner, he watched Lily devour chocolate chip pancakes while his mind raced through logistical problems, childcare, school enrollment, work accommodations. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The board meeting was in an hour, and he had a child with nowhere to go. "Lily," he said carefully, "I have an important meeting this morning. I'm going to need to arrange for someone to look after you for a few hours." Lily's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "That's okay. Mom was busy sometimes too." The simple acceptance in her voice made Robert feel both relieved and guilty. He made a quick call to his building's concierge service, arranging for a vetted babysitter to meet them at his apartment. After a whirlwind shopping trip for basic necessities, they returned to find Mrs. Patel, a kindly older woman, waiting. Robert gave hurried instructions, promised Lily he'd be back soon, and rushed off to salvage his professional reputation. The board meeting was every bit as difficult as he'd anticipated. "Your behavior yesterday was completely unprofessional," Harold Winters, the head of the board, stated coldly. "Walking out on a critical meeting without explanation. Unreachable for hours. This isn't like you, Robert." "I had a family emergency," Robert said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd prioritized family over work? Had he ever? Family? Harold raised an eyebrow. Since when? Robert took a deep breath. It appears I have a daughter. Her mother recently passed away, and she's come into my custody. It was unexpected. The stunned silence that followed gave him a moment to collect his thoughts. I apologize for my abrupt departure yesterday. It won't happen again. But I will need to make some adjustments to my schedule in the coming weeks as I sort out this situation. Whispers erupted around the table. Robert Thompson, notorious workaholic, asking for flexibility? This is highly irregular, Harold frowned. The Nakamura merger is at a critical stage. They specifically want you leading the negotiations. And I will, Robert assured him. But I may need to conduct some meetings virtually, adjust some timelines. We're not structured for executive work-life balance, Harold said bluntly. Especially not for sudden parenthood. Perhaps you should consider other arrangements for the child until after the merger. Robert felt a flash of irritation. She has a name. Lily. And she's just lost her mother. I'm sympathetic, Harold said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But this company relies on your undivided attention. Thousands of jobs depend on your focus, Robert. Surely you can find a suitable temporary guardian? The meeting continued, with Robert eventually agreeing to maintain his usual hours through the critical merger period, promising to find appropriate childcare arrangements. By the time he left the office that evening, his head was pounding with stress. He returned home to find his apartment transformed. Lily and Mrs. Patel had rearranged the guest room, putting away the new clothes and toys they'd purchased that morning. A child's drawing was proudly displayed on his refrigerator, a stick figure man in a suit standing next to a smaller figure with curly hair. Mrs. Patel pulled him aside. She's a lovely child, Mr. Thompson. Very polite. But she asked me several times when you'd be back. I think she's worried. Guilt gnawed at him as he thanked and paid Mrs. Patel. Lily emerged from the guest room, her face lighting up when she saw him. You came back, she said, as though she genuinely doubted it. Of course I did, Robert replied, unsettled by her surprise. This is my home. And is it my home too? She asked carefully. Just for now, or? Robert hadn't prepared for such direct questions. We're still figuring things out, Lily. But yes, you'll stay here while we do that. Her smile was worth the chaos of the day. The next week established a tentative routine. Mrs. Patel would arrive early, help Lily get ready, and stay with her all day while Robert worked. He'd return home for dinner, spend an awkward hour or two attempting conversation with a 7-year-old, then retreat to his home office to work more after she went to bed. It wasn't ideal, but it was functional. Robert told himself they were both adjusting, that things would get easier with time. The DNA test results came back confirming what he already knew, Lily was undeniably his daughter. Then came the Nakamura dinner. I need you to represent Thompson Enterprises at a crucial dinner with Mr. Nakamura tonight, Harold informed Robert late that afternoon. His plane just landed, and he specifically requested your presence. Tonight? Robert checked his watch. That's not possible. I have no childcare arrangements past 6. Harold's expression hardened. This is exactly what I was concerned about. The future of this company hangs in the balance, Robert. Surely you can find someone for one evening? Robert made desperate calls, but Mrs. Patel was unavailable, and he had no friends or family to call upon. His life had been all work for so long that his personal connections had withered away. By 6:30, he was pacing his office, tie loosened in frustration. The dinner was at 8. Lily was waiting at home with Mrs. Patel, who had already extended her hours as a special favor. His phone rang, Mr. Nakamura's assistant, confirming his attendance. In that moment, faced with an impossible choice, Robert made a decision that would haunt him. He called Mrs. Patel. "I need a huge favor," he began, hating himself for the words even as he spoke them. "Could Lily possibly stay at your place tonight? I'll pick her up first thing in the morning, but this dinner is unavoidable." There was a pause on the line. "Mr. Thompson, I don't usually do overnight care. I have my own grandchildren visiting early tomorrow." "Please," Robert pressed. "I'll double your usual rate. Triple it." Mrs. Patel reluctantly agreed, though her disappointment was evident even over the phone. When Robert arrived home to change for dinner, he found Lily sitting on the sofa, a small overnight bag beside her. Her expression was carefully blank, the face of a child who had learned not to show disappointment. "Mrs. Patel explained that you have an important dinner," she said quietly. "And that I'll be staying at her house tonight." Robert kneeled before her, straightening the collar of her shirt in a gesture that felt inadequate. "It's just one night, Lily. A very important client came to town unexpectedly." "It's okay," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. "Work comes first. Mom always said that about you." The casual observation struck him like a physical blow. Is that how Anna had explained his absence? Is that the legacy he wanted to leave his daughter? But the merger, thousands of jobs, the company he'd built from nothing. "I'll make it up to you," he promised. "Maybe this weekend we could do something special." Lily nodded, but the light had gone out of her eyes. The dinner with Mr. Nakamura went perfectly. Robert was charming, persuasive, completely focused. The merger discussions advanced significantly. By all professional measures, it was a tremendous success. But as he returned to his empty apartment at midnight, the victory felt hollow. He stood in the doorway of the guest room, Lily's room, and saw the stuffed rabbit sitting on the carefully made bed. Something tightened in his chest. The next morning, he rose early to pick up Lily as promised. But when he arrived at Mrs. Patel's apartment, he found both her and Lily already awake and tense. "Mr. Thompson," Mrs. Patel said gravely, "I need to speak with you privately." In the kitchen, while Lily waited in the living room, Mrs. Patel didn't mince words. "Lily cried most of the night. She thinks you're going to send her away permanently. She told me her mother warned her you might not want to be bothered with a child." Shame washed over Robert. It was one night, an emergency. Mrs. Patel cut him off. "With all due respect, sir, children need stability. If you're not prepared to provide that, perhaps you should consider what's truly best for her." Robert drove Lily home in silence, her small overnight bag on the seat between them like a barrier. Back at the apartment, she went straight to her room without a word. Standing in his expansive living room, Robert faced the truth he'd been avoiding: he was failing her. In just over a week, he'd managed to confirm Anna's warning that work would always come first. The realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. His phone buzzed with a message from Harold. "Nakamura impressed. Wants follow-up dinner tonight." Robert stared at the message for a long moment, then turned and walked toward Lily's room, knowing the decision he made now would shape both their lives forever. Robert stood outside Lily's bedroom door, hand raised to knock, caught in the crossfire of two worlds pulling him in opposite directions. His phone vibrated again, another message from Harold about tonight's dinner. He silenced it and finally knocked softly. "Lily? Can I come in?" When no answer came, he carefully opened the door. Lily sat cross-legged on the bed, the stuffed rabbit in her lap, staring out the window at the city below. She didn't turn when he entered. "Are you okay?" Robert asked, immediately recognizing the inadequacy of the question. Lily shrugged, a small movement of thin shoulders. "I'm used to it." Those 4 words carried more weight than any business negotiation Robert had ever conducted. Used to disappointment. Used to being an afterthought. Used to adults putting other priorities ahead of her. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain some distance. "I'm sorry about last night. It was poor planning on my part." "It's fine," Lily said in a voice that made it clear it was anything but fine. Mrs. Patel was nice. "Lily, look at me," Robert said gently. When she finally turned, he saw red-rimmed eyes and a determined little chin. "This is new for both of us. I'm not very good at it yet." "Are you going to send me away?" she asked bluntly. "Because if you are, I'd rather know now." The directness startled him. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're busy and important. And because Mom said you might not want to be a dad." Her lower lip trembled slightly, but she pressed on. "She said some people aren't meant to be parents, and that's okay." Robert felt each word like a knife. Had he really been so cold, so career-obsessed that Anna anticipated he would reject his own child? The worst part was, she hadn't been entirely wrong. He had been struggling with exactly that question. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated again, this time with a call. Harold's name flashed on the screen. Robert hesitated, then deliberately pressed decline. "I don't know if I'm meant to be a parent," he admitted to Lily. "But I do know you deserve better than what I've given you this past week." Lily looked down at her rabbit, picking at a loose thread. "Mom said your job makes you a lot of money." "It does. But does it make you happy?" The question, so simple yet profound, caught Robert off guard. When was the last time he'd even considered his own happiness? Success, achievement, growth, those were the metrics he lived by. Sometimes, he answered honestly. But not always. Mom wasn't rich, but she was happy, Lily said with the certainty of a child. Except when she got sick. Robert felt something shift inside him, a perspective changing, priorities rearranging themselves. "I have an idea," he said. "Would you like to see where I work?" Lily looked up, surprised. "Really? Really? Get your shoes on." 20 minutes later, they walked into Thompson Enterprises together. It was Saturday, and the office was mostly empty, but a few dedicated employees looked up in surprise as their CEO strode through with a small child by his side. "This is my office," Robert said, opening the door to his corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city. Awards and accolades lined the walls. A massive desk dominated the space. Lily walked around slowly, taking it all in. "It's bigger than our whole apartment was," she observed. "And this," Robert continued, leading her to a wall of framed photographs, "is the history of the company." He showed her pictures of himself cutting ribbons at factory openings, shaking hands with politicians and business leaders, standing proudly beside new product launches. As they moved along the wall, Robert realized something troubling. In not one of these dozens of photos was he genuinely smiling. In each, his expression was the same practiced, professional mask. "Is this all you do?" Lily asked. "Work stuff?" "Mostly," Robert admitted. "The company takes a lot of time to run." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "Then, can I draw at your desk?" Robert found her some paper and pens, and watched as she settled into his executive chair, her feet dangling far above the floor, tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated on her artwork. His phone rang again. This time it was Priya. "Sir, Mr. Nakamura's team is asking for confirmation about tonight," she said when he answered. "And Harold has called me 3 times looking for you." Robert looked at Lily, completely absorbed in her drawing. In that moment, the choice that had seemed so impossible became startlingly clear. "Tell them I won't be attending," he said firmly. "Family emergency." "Sir?" "In fact, Priya, I need you to clear my schedule for the next week. I'm taking some personal time." There was a pause on the line. "Personal time? You haven't taken a day off in 4 years. Then I'm overdue, wouldn't you say?" For the first time in longer than he could remember, Robert felt something like freedom. "I'll check emails in the evenings, but otherwise, I'm unavailable." He hung up before Priya could recover from her shock. Whatever fallout came, he would deal with it later. "Are you in trouble?" Lily asked, looking up from her drawing. "Maybe a little," Robert smiled. "But sometimes trouble is worth it." "What are you drawing?" She turned the paper around. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing in front of what appeared to be a house with a tree beside it. "That's you and me," she explained. "And that's a house with a yard. Mom always said someday we'd have a yard." Robert felt something catch in his throat. "It's beautiful, Lily." For the rest of the day, they explored the city together. Robert took Lily to the Children's Museum, to a park where she could run and play, to a bookstore where she selected a stack of books with a reverence that reminded him of Anna's love of reading. By evening, when they shared pizza on the floor of his living room, Lily insisted it tasted better that way. Robert realized he hadn't checked his phone in hours. He'd expected the day to feel like a chore, an obligation to be fulfilled. Instead, watching Lily experience simple joys had awakened something long dormant within him, a capacity for wonder, for presence in the moment. That night, as he tucked her in, she looked up at him with serious eyes. "Today was nice." "Thank you." "It was nice for me too," he said, surprised by how true it was. "Will you have to work tomorrow?" And there it was, reality intruding once more. Robert sighed. "Not all day. But I do have some things to take care of in the morning." Lily nodded, accepting but wary. She had been let down too many times to fully trust his change of heart. The next morning, Robert woke to the sound of his phone ringing. "Harold, again." With a groan, he answered. "Where the hell were you last night?" Harold demanded without preamble. "Nakamura was insulted by your absence. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Good morning to you too, Harold," Robert replied calmly. "Is the merger in jeopardy?" "Not yet, but..." "Then it can wait until tomorrow. I'm taking personal time, as I informed Priya." Harold's voice rose in disbelief. "Personal time? Now?" "Robert, the board is concerned. There's talk of an emergency meeting to discuss your situation." "My situation?" Robert felt a spark of anger. "You mean my daughter?" "Your alleged daughter," Harold corrected. "We've done some checking. The timing is suspicious. This could be a ploy to extract money from you and the company." Robert sat up straight, fully awake now. "You did what?" "We have a responsibility to protect the company's interests. This child appears out of nowhere just as we're finalizing the biggest deal in our history. You must admit the timing is suspect." "Her name is Lily," Robert said coldly. "And she is my daughter. The DNA test confirmed it." "DNA tests can be manipulated," Harold persisted. "Robert, be reasonable. At least consider the possibility that her mother planned this, that." "Her mother is dead," Robert cut him off, his voice hard. "Cancer. Would you like to accuse her of faking that too?" There was a pause on the line. "We need you focused, Robert. The company needs you. Thousands of employees depend on you making rational decisions, not being manipulated by sentiment." Robert glanced toward Lily's room, where she was still sleeping peacefully. "I'll see you tomorrow, Harold." "Robert." He hung up, a sick feeling in his stomach. He had built the company culture that now saw his daughter as a threat, a distraction, an inconvenience. For years, he had preached relentless focus, putting business above all else. Should he be surprised that his board now expected him to practice what he had preached? When Lily woke, he tried to push the conversation from his mind. They had breakfast together, and he helped her arrange her new books on the shelves in her room. By midday, however, his inbox was overflowing, and the constant calls couldn't be ignored forever. "I need to do some work for a few hours," he told Lily reluctantly. "Will you be okay entertaining yourself? You can watch TV, or read your new books." Lily nodded, though disappointment flashed across her face. "It's okay. I understand." For the next 3 hours, Robert was absorbed in damage control. The Nakamura team was indeed upset by his absence, and it took all his diplomatic skills to smooth things over. The board wanted reassurances that his personal situation wouldn't affect the merger. By late afternoon, his stress levels had skyrocketed back to their usual heights. When he finally emerged from his home office, he found Lily sitting quietly on the balcony, watching the city below. "I'm sorry that took so long," he said, joining her. "It's okay," she replied, her standard answer when things were not okay at all. "Lily," Robert began carefully, "I need to ask you something important. When your mom told you about me, what exactly did she say?" Lily looked surprised by the question. "She said you were very smart and built your own company. That you worked really hard and became successful." "Did she ever?" Robert hesitated, hating himself for even asking. "Did she ever suggest that you should come find me if something happened to her? Was that always the plan?" Lily's brow furrowed in confusion. "No. Mom wanted me to live with Aunt Jenny in California. But Aunt Jenny had a baby and said she couldn't take me too. That's when the social worker found your name in Mom's papers." Relief washed over Robert, followed immediately by shame. He had actually allowed Harold's insinuations to plant doubt in his mind. "Why are you asking?" Lily questioned, watching him closely. Robert shook his head. "It's not important. Some people at work were just curious about how you found me." "Do they think I'm lying?" Lily asked with surprising perception. "Some kids at school didn't believe me when I said my dad was a businessman. They said if I had a dad, he would be around." The simple observation landed like a punch to the gut. Robert reached out and took Lily's small hand in his. "You're not lying. And I am your father. The people at work, they're just not used to me having a family." "Am I your family?" Lily asked, hope and fear mingled in her voice. Before Robert could answer, his phone rang yet again. Harold's name appeared on the screen, and something in Robert snapped. He silenced the call and turned to Lily. "Yes," he said firmly. "You are my family. And tomorrow, we're going to show my colleagues exactly what that means." Monday morning arrived with a sense of impending confrontation. Robert dressed in his best suit, and Lily wore one of her new outfits, a blue dress with small white flowers. "Are you sure I should come?" she asked nervously as they rode the elevator up to the executive floor. "Absolutely," Robert assured her, though his own stomach was tight with anxiety. "It's time everyone met my daughter." As they walked into the boardroom, conversation stopped abruptly. Around the large table sat the board members and executive team, clearly in the middle of a discussion about him. Harold stood at the head of the table, his expression darkening at the sight of Lily. "Robert," he said tightly. "We weren't expecting you to bring guests." "Not a guest," Robert corrected, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "My daughter." Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps she could wait outside while we discuss some sensitive company matters?" "Actually," Robert said, pulling out a chair for Lily next to his usual seat, "I think it's important she stays. After all, we're discussing my family situation, aren't we?" The tension in the room was palpable as Robert and Lily sat down. Lily kept her eyes downcast, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "As I was saying before you arrived," Harold continued, "the board has concerns about your recent distraction. The Nakamura merger requires your complete focus." "I agree," Robert nodded. "It's an important deal." Harold seemed relieved by his acquiescence. "Good. Then you understand why we've been concerned about this development. He gestured vaguely toward Lily without actually looking at her. Oh, I understand perfectly, Robert said, his voice deceptively calm. You're concerned that after years of giving everything to this company, my time, my health, my personal life, I might finally have something else that matters to me. Harold frowned. That's not. It is, Robert cut him off. And you know what? You're right to be concerned. Because Lily does matter to me. And that changes things. The atmosphere in the room shifted, executives exchanging uneasy glances. Beside him, Robert felt Lily sit up a little straighter. What happened next would determine the course of both their futures, and neither of them was prepared for the storm that was about to break. The boardroom fell silent as Robert's words hung in the air. Lily's small hand found his under the table, her fingers surprisingly steady compared to his own. Robert, Harold said, adopting a conciliatory tone, no one is questioning your right to a personal life. We're simply concerned about timing. The Nakamura merger represents years of work, your work. Surely you don't want to jeopardize that. I don't, Robert agreed. But I'm not the one creating a false choice between my daughter and this company. One of the other board members, Diane Chen, spoke up. Robert, we all have families. We understand the pull of personal obligations. But you've always been the one to insist that company commitments come first. You've canceled vacations, missed anniversaries, worked through holidays. You set that standard. The truth of her words stung. He had indeed created this culture of work above all else. Now they were simply holding him to his own expectations. Perhaps I was wrong, Robert said quietly. A murmur ran through the room. Robert Thompson admitting he was wrong? It was unprecedented. Now, let's be reasonable, Harold interjected. Nobody's perfect. But the fact remains that this merger will determine the company's trajectory for the next decade. We need you present, focused, and uncompromised. I'm here, Robert said. I'm ready to move forward with the merger negotiations. But my terms have changed. Harold's expression darkened. Terms? Yes, Robert nodded. First, I'll be restructuring my schedule. No more 16-hour days, no more weekend emergency meetings unless they're truly emergencies. I'll delegate more responsibility to the executive team, many of whom are more than capable of handling things I've been micromanaging. The executives around the table sat straighter, surprised by this unexpected vote of confidence. Second, Robert continued, I'll be taking a proper paternity leave after the merger is finalized. 1 month, minimum. A month? Harold sputtered. That's less than the parental leave we offer to every other employee in this company, Robert finished for him. I've checked our own policy. Harold's face reddened. Those policies are for what, Harold? Robert challenged. For employees who matter less than me? For people whose family commitments are somehow more valid than mine? Lily watched this exchange with wide eyes, her gaze moving between the adults like she was following a tennis match. Finally, Robert said, his voice growing firmer, I want it understood that my daughter is not a topic for board discussion or speculation. She is my family, and that's the end of it. Harold shook his head, a calculating look entering his eyes. This is exactly what we feared. Your judgment is compromised. He turned to address the other board members. Robert has been an exceptional CEO, but this situation is unprecedented. A child appearing out of nowhere, claiming paternity, and suddenly he's making radical changes to company operations? We have a fiduciary duty to consider whether temporary leadership might be appropriate while Robert sorts out his personal affairs. The implied threat of removal hung heavy in the air. Robert felt Lily's grip tighten on his hand. The DNA test confirms she's my daughter, Robert stated flatly. And we're all very happy for you, Harold said with artificial warmth. But that doesn't change the fact that your priorities have clearly shifted, and at the worst possible time. Robert looked around the table, reading the expressions of people he'd worked alongside for years. Some seemed uncomfortable with Harold's aggressive stance, but none spoke up in his defense. I see, Robert said slowly. So being a father automatically makes me unfit to lead, is that it? Of course not, Harold replied smoothly. But the distraction of a sudden, unexpected child? The emotional upheaval? The clear conflict of interest? Yes, those things concern us. Robert felt a cold anger building inside him. Let me be absolutely clear. There is no conflict between being Lily's father and being this company's CEO. I can and will do both. Forgive me for being blunt, Harold countered, but evidence suggests otherwise. You've missed critical meetings, been unreachable during important negotiations, and now you're proposing a radical restructuring of your role, all within days of this child's appearance. Before Robert could respond, Lily's small voice cut through the tension. I'm sorry I'm causing trouble. All eyes turned to her, many board members seeming to truly notice her presence for the first time. You're not causing trouble, Lily, Robert assured her. But they're mad because you're spending time with me instead of working, she persisted. Mom always said you were very important and busy. I don't want to ruin your job. The simple, earnest statement hit Robert like a physical blow. This child, his child, was willing to sacrifice her relationship with her only remaining parent for his career. The tragedy of it struck him to his core. Harold, however, saw an opportunity. That's very mature of you, young lady, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And I'm sure we can find an arrangement that works for everyone. Perhaps a boarding school? Thompson Enterprises could certainly fund the very best education, and Robert could focus on his responsibilities here. You'd be well provided for. Robert stared at Harold in disbelief. Was he actually suggesting shipping Lily off to boarding school, barely a month after she'd lost her mother? That won't be necessary, Robert said coldly. Well, something has to give, Harold pressed. And frankly, Robert, if it comes down to a choice between your personal situation and the welfare of this company, I think we all know what the responsible decision is. The boardroom fell silent. The ultimatum had been delivered, choose the company or choose his daughter. Robert looked at Lily, who sat with her shoulders hunched, trying to make herself smaller in her chair. How many times in her short life had adults talked about her as a problem to be solved? How many times had she been made to feel like an inconvenience? In that moment, something shifted within Robert. The ambition that had driven him for decades, the relentless pursuit of success that had defined his existence, it all seemed suddenly hollow compared to the weight of his responsibility to this small person beside him. You're right, Harold, Robert said quietly. Something does have to give. Harold nodded, satisfied. I'm glad you're being reasonable. Now, about the Nakamura meeting this afternoon. I won't be there, Robert interrupted. Harold blinked in confusion. What? I said I won't be there, Robert repeated, his voice gaining strength. In fact, effective immediately, I'm taking a leave of absence. You can't be serious, Harold sputtered. I've never been more serious in my life, Robert replied, standing up. Lily looked up at him in surprise. For years, I've put this company first, ahead of relationships, ahead of my health, ahead of everything. I convinced myself that was necessary for success. I was wrong. Robert, don't do anything rash, one of the other board members cautioned. This isn't rash, Robert said. This is probably the first truly clear-headed decision I've made in years. He looked down at Lily. Come on, sweetheart. We're leaving. Lily stood, clutching her small purse with both hands, confusion written across her face. If you walk out that door, Harold warned, the board will have no choice but to consider your position vacant. Robert paused at the door, Lily's hand in his. Do what you have to do, Harold. I'm doing what I should have done from the beginning. With that, he led Lily out of the boardroom, past the startled executives, and down the corridor toward the elevators. Are you in trouble? Lily asked as they waited for the elevator. Probably, Robert admitted. Because of me? No, he said firmly. Because I forgot what really matters. It took you to remind me. As they rode down to the lobby, Lily looked up at him. What happens now? I don't know exactly, Robert said honestly. But we'll figure it out together. They walked through the lobby, past curious stares and whispers. News traveled fast in the corporate world, and Robert's dramatic exit from the board meeting was already making the rounds. Outside, the spring air felt fresh after the stifling atmosphere of the boardroom. For the first time in years, Robert had no meeting scheduled, no calls to return, no crisis to manage. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. Are you sad about your job? Lily asked as they strolled along the sidewalk. Robert considered the question carefully. Parts of it, yes. I built that company from nothing. It's been my life for a long time. Will they really fire you? They might, he acknowledged. Or they might come to their senses. Either way, we'll be okay. They stopped at a small park, finding a bench in the sunshine. Lily's legs swung back and forth, not quite reaching the ground. What if they don't want you back? She asked, the worry clear in her voice. Robert smiled. Then I'll start something new. I've done it before. But you worked so hard, Lily persisted. Mom said you were the smartest businessman in the city. Your mom was very kind, Robert said softly. But there are more important things than being a successful businessman. Like what? Like being a good father, he replied. I haven't been one yet, but I'd like to try. Lily's face brightened momentarily, then grew serious again. But what if you try and don't like it? What if you decide it's too hard? The question broke Robert's heart. This child had already faced so much rejection and uncertainty in her young life. Lily, he said, turning to face her directly. I can't promise I'll be perfect at this. I'll make mistakes. But I can promise I won't give up. You're my daughter, and that's forever. For the first time since she'd arrived on his doorstep, Lily's smile reached her eyes. Really forever? Really forever, he confirmed. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching people hurry past, caught up in their own busy lives. Robert's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket, but he ignored it. Later that afternoon, they returned to his apartment. Robert was surprised to find Priya waiting in the lobby. Sir, she said, looking uncharacteristically anxious. The board has been trying to reach you. I'm sure they have, Robert replied calmly. They've called an emergency session, Priya continued. There's talk of appointing an interim CEO. Robert nodded, feeling strangely detached from news that would have sent him into a panic just days ago. Thank you for letting me know. Priya glanced at Lily, then back to Robert. If I may speak frankly, sir. Always. What you did up there, it was long overdue. A small smile lifted the corner of her mouth. And for what it's worth, a number of the executives are uncomfortable with Harold's power play. They're just afraid to say so. Robert raised an eyebrow. Is that so? The company needs you, sir, Priya said. But perhaps not in the same way as before. As she turned to leave, she added, oh, and Mr. Nakamura himself called. He said, and I quote, family obligations are sacred. I respect a man who understands this. After Priya left, Robert and Lily rode the elevator up to his apartment. His mind was racing with possibilities, with choices to be made. Are you going back to work? Lily asked quietly as he unlocked the door. Robert looked down at her, this small person who had turned his life upside down in the span of 2 weeks. "Not today," he said. "Today, I think we should make this place feel more like home. What do you think?" Lily's face lit up. "Can we get a plant? Mom always said homes need something green and growing." "We can get several plants," Robert smiled. "And maybe some color for your room? The white walls are a bit boring, don't you think?" As they made plans to transform the sterile apartment into a home, Robert's phone rang again. Harold's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, Robert declined the call and turned his phone off. Whatever crisis the board was facing, it would wait until tomorrow. Today belonged to Lily. That evening, as they sat among shopping bags full of colorful pillows, picture frames, and yes, several small plants, Lily asked a question that caught Robert off guard. "Do you think Mom would be happy about us?" Robert thought about Anna, her intelligence, her warmth, her quiet strength. He thought about how she had raised their daughter alone, how she had told Lily about him despite their painful history. "Yes," he said softly. "I think she would be." "Me too," Lily nodded, carefully positioning a small succulent on the windowsill. "She always said things work out the way they're supposed to, even when it seems like they won't." From the mouth of a child, wisdom that put his years of strategic planning to shame. Robert watched as Lily arranged her new treasures, already making the space her own. Whatever came next, whether he fought for his company or started anew, whether he succeeded or failed in the business world, he knew he had made the right choice. For the first time in his adult life, Robert Thompson had chosen family over ambition. And somehow, instead of feeling like a sacrifice, it felt like freedom. Little did he know that the board's reaction to his choice would test his newfound resolve in ways he couldn't imagine, and that the greatest challenge to his relationship with Lily was still to come. 3 days after walking out of the boardroom, Robert sat at his kitchen counter reviewing legal documents. Lily was at the dining table, working on a colorful drawing, her legs swinging freely from the chair. The apartment had transformed in small but meaningful ways. Colorful throw pillows brightened the living room. Family photos, hastily printed from Anna's old social media accounts, now adorned the walls. Plants of various sizes occupied windowsills and side tables. It looked lived in, no longer a showpiece but a home. Robert's phone buzzed with yet another message from Diane Chen, one of the more reasonable board members. She had been reaching out daily, trying to broker a resolution. "Bad news?" Lily asked, noticing his frown. "Not exactly," Robert replied. "Just complicated grown-up stuff." "About the company?" "Yes. The board is meeting again today." Lily set down her colored pencil. "Are they still mad at you?" "Some of them," Robert admitted. "Mostly Harold." "I don't like him," Lily said simply. "He looks at me like I'm a math problem he can't solve." Robert laughed despite himself. "That's a pretty accurate description. Are you going to the meeting?" Robert shook his head. "Not this one. I've made my position clear." The truth was more complicated. His lawyer had advised him to maintain his distance while they negotiated. The board was split, some supporting Harold's aggressive move to replace Robert, others recognizing the value he brought to the company. The Nakamura deal hung in the balance, with the Japanese businessman refusing to proceed without Robert's direct involvement. It was corporate warfare, the kind of strategic battle Robert would normally relish. But now, watching Lily return to her artwork, he found it hard to summon the same passion. The stakes had changed. His phone rang, Gloria Wells from Child Protective Services. Robert had been expecting her call. "Mr. Thompson," she greeted him. "I'm following up on our conversation about finalizing Lily's living arrangements. Are you still planning to pursue permanent custody?" "Absolutely," Robert confirmed, stepping onto the balcony so Lily wouldn't overhear. "My lawyer is preparing the paperwork. Good, Ms. Wells sounded pleased. I'll need to conduct another home visit, of course. How about tomorrow afternoon? That would be fine, Robert agreed. We'll be here. And how is Lily adjusting? Robert glanced through the glass doors at his daughter, her face a study in concentration as she worked on her drawing. Better than I am, honestly. She's remarkable. After ending the call, Robert returned inside to find Lily watching him curiously. Was that about me? She asked. Yes, he acknowledged, seeing no reason to hide it. That was Ms. Wells. She's going to visit us tomorrow to make sure everything is going well here. Lily's expression grew worried. Is she checking if you're a good dad? Something like that, Robert smiled gently. It's standard procedure. What if she decides you're not? The fear in Lily's voice was unmistakable. Robert sat beside her at the table. That's not going to happen. I'm your father, and nothing is going to change that. Lily didn't look convinced. But you had to leave your job because of me. What if you start to feel bad about that? The question struck at Robert's greatest fear, not that he would resent Lily, but that she would always carry the burden of thinking she had cost him his career. Lily, listen to me, he said earnestly. I didn't leave my job because of you. I left because the board, people like Harold, wanted me to make an impossible choice. They wanted me to be the same workaholic I've always been, and that's not who I want to be anymore. Because of me, Lily persisted. Because you helped me see what really matters, Robert corrected. There's a difference. Before Lily could respond, the apartment buzzer sounded. Robert wasn't expecting anyone. Checking the security monitor, he was surprised to see Priya and two other executives from Thompson Enterprises. Wait here, he told Lily, moving to answer the door. Priya stood in the hallway looking uncharacteristically tense. Beside her were Jack Torres, the chief financial officer, and Nora Williams, the head of research and development, both longtime colleagues whom Robert respected. This is unexpected, Robert greeted them. We need to talk, Priya said without preamble. May we come in? Robert hesitated, glancing back at Lily. Now isn't ideal. It's important, Jack insisted. The board meeting just ended. Decisions have been made. Robert sighed, stepping aside to let them enter. As they walked into the living room, all three visitors noticed Lily at the dining table. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to discomfort. Hello, Lily said politely. Hello, Nora replied with a warm smile. You must be Lily. I'm Nora. I work with your dad. Lily nodded, her eyes moving between the three visitors. Lily, Robert said, would you mind continuing your drawing in your room for a few minutes? I need to speak with my colleagues. Normally, Lily might have protested, but something in Robert's tone told her this was serious. She gathered her art supplies and disappeared down the hallway. Once her door closed, Robert turned to his visitors. What happened? Harold pushed through a vote, Jack explained grimly. The board has appointed him interim CEO while your status is under review. He's moving fast, Nora added. Already reassigning your direct reports, canceling projects you championed. And the Nakamura deal? Robert asked. Stalled, Priya said. Mr. Nakamura refuses to proceed without you, but Harold is sending another team to Tokyo tomorrow to try to salvage it. Robert absorbed this information with surprising calm. A week ago, it would have sent him into a strategic frenzy. Now, he felt an odd detachment. Why are you telling me this in person? He asked. You could have called. The three exchanged glances before Nora spoke. Because we don't agree with what's happening. Harold is using your situation with Lily as a pretext, but this has been brewing for months. He wants control of the company and saw an opportunity. And, Jack added, we're not the only ones who feel this way. At least half the executive team is uncomfortable with his tactics. Robert leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms. What exactly are you proposing? Come back, Priya said simply. Fight this. The company needs you. On what terms? Robert asked. Because I meant what I said in that boardroom. I won't return to being the CEO who puts work above everything else. We know, Nora nodded. And frankly, that version of you wasn't always the best leader. Brilliant, yes. Effective, absolutely. But there was a human cost, to you and to everyone around you. The frank assessment was both surprising and refreshing. Robert had never allowed this kind of candor from his team before. We're not asking you to choose between the company and your daughter, Jack clarified. We're asking you to find a balance that works for both. Before Robert could respond, a small voice came from the hallway. Dad? They all turned to see Lily standing there, her expression troubled. Robert realized with a jolt that this was the first time she had called him Dad instead of Mr. Thompson. Lily, he said gently, I thought you were drawing in your room. I was, but I heard talking about the company. She looked at the three visitors, then back to Robert. Are you going back to work? The vulnerability in her question hung in the air. Robert crossed the room and knelt before her. I don't know yet. We're just talking about possibilities. But if you go back, Lily pressed, will things be like before? Will you be too busy again? Robert was acutely aware of his colleagues witnessing this exchange, but found he didn't care. No, he said firmly. Things will never be like before. That's a promise. Lily studied his face intently, searching for reassurance. Harold doesn't like me. Harold doesn't know you, Robert corrected. And his opinion doesn't matter. But he's the boss now, right? Lily was too perceptive for her own good. That's what they said. Robert glanced back at his team, who looked sheepish at being overheard. Temporarily, he acknowledged. But that might change. Because of me? The worry in her voice was unmistakable. No, Robert said firmly. Because sometimes adults make poor decisions when they're afraid or angry. Harold is afraid of change. Lily considered this. Mom said change is scary but necessary. Like when a butterfly has to leave its cocoon. The simple wisdom left the adults momentarily speechless. It was Nora who recovered first. Your mom sounds very smart, she said with a gentle smile. And she's absolutely right. Lily turned back to Robert. If you want to go back to your company, I won't be sad. I promise. The selflessness of this small child who had already lost so much struck Robert to his core. She was willing to risk losing his attention, his presence in her life, because she thought it would make him happy. In that moment, Robert knew with absolute certainty what he needed to do. Thank you for coming, he said to his colleagues, rising to his feet. I appreciate your support and your candor. I'll need some time to think, but I'll be in touch soon. After they left, Robert sat with Lily on the couch. You know, he said, we never finished our conversation from before. You asked what would happen if Ms. Wells decided I wasn't a good dad. Lily nodded, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. The truth is, Lily, I'm not worried about what Ms. Wells thinks. I'm worried about what you think. Am I being a good dad to you? The question clearly caught her by surprise. I think so, she said cautiously. You got me new clothes and books. And you make sure I eat vegetables. Robert smiled. Those are good things, but being a dad is more than just providing stuff. It's about being there when you need me, listening to you, helping you grow up strong and happy. It's about putting you first, even when it's difficult. Like when you left your meeting for me? Exactly like that. Lily thought for a moment. I think you're learning, she said finally. Just like I'm learning how to be your daughter. Her words humbled him completely. This child, who had lost her mother, been uprooted from her home, and thrust into a strange new life, was giving him grace to learn and grow alongside her. "I have a big decision to make," Robert told her. "About the company. But before I make it, I want you to know something important. No matter what happens with my job, you will always come first. Always. Promise?" Lily asked, her eyes searching his. "I promise," Robert said, and for the first time in his life, he made a commitment he knew without doubt he would keep. The next day, Gloria Wells conducted her home visit. She noted the changes to the apartment with approval, observed Robert and Lily's interactions, and asked both of them questions about their new routine. "You've made remarkable progress," she told Robert privately before leaving. "I'll be recommending approval of your permanent custody application." That afternoon, Robert made 2 important calls. The first was to his lawyer, instructing him to proceed with the custody paperwork immediately. The second was to the board of directors. 1 week later, Robert and Lily walked into Thompson Enterprises together. This time, instead of the boardroom, they headed for the company auditorium where the entire staff had assembled. As they entered, a hush fell over the crowd. At the front of the room, Harold stood with a fixed smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you all for coming," Robert began, standing at the podium with Lily beside him. "As you know, there have been some changes around here lately. Some of you may have heard rumors about my future with the company. Today, I want to set the record straight." He looked out at the faces of people who had worked alongside him for years, some friends, some merely colleagues, all now waiting to hear their company's fate. "Thompson Enterprises has been my life's work," he continued. "I've given it everything I had, often at great personal cost. That approach built a successful company, but it also built a culture that prioritizes work above all else, above health, above relationships, above family." Robert looked down at Lily, who gave him an encouraging smile. "3 weeks ago, my life changed forever when this young lady showed up at our front door. Her name is Lily, and she's my daughter. Some saw her arrival as a distraction, a problem to be solved. I made that mistake myself, briefly." He paused, looking directly at Harold. "But I've come to realize that she isn't the problem. The problem was me, a man so focused on success that he forgot what success is for." A murmur ran through the crowd. This kind of personal revelation from their always composed CEO was unprecedented. "I've spent the past week negotiating with the board about my return," Robert explained. "I'm pleased to announce that, effective immediately, I will be resuming my role as CEO of Thompson Enterprises." Applause broke out, but Robert held up his hand. "However, there will be changes. I've proposed, and the board has accepted, a restructuring of our leadership team and company policies." He outlined the changes: more distributed leadership, more reasonable working hours, comprehensive parental leave, childcare support, and a fundamental shift in how success would be measured, not just in profits, but in sustainability, employee well-being, and community impact. "Some of these changes may seem radical," Robert acknowledged. "They certainly did to some board members." He glanced meaningfully at Harold, whose smile had vanished. "But they're necessary for this company to thrive in the long term. And they're non-negotiable for my continued leadership." As the meeting concluded, employees approached to introduce themselves to Lily. Robert watched in amazement as she charmed them effortlessly, this child who had so fundamentally changed his life. Later, as they walked back to his office, now featuring a small desk in the corner where Lily could do homework on the afternoons she came to work with him, Robert felt a peace he had never known before. "Are you happy, Dad?" Lily asked, taking his hand as they walked. "Happier than I've ever been," he answered truthfully. "Me too," she said. "Mom would be proud of us." Robert's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes," he managed. "I think she would." That evening, as they walked home rather than taking the car, another new habit that gave them time to talk about their day. Robert reflected on how completely his life had changed in just a few short weeks. He had nearly lost everything that truly mattered by clinging to a narrow definition of success. It had taken the courage of a 7-year-old girl to show him a better way. "What are you thinking about?" Lily asked, skipping beside him. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the things that seem like interruptions to our plans turn out to be the best parts of our story," Robert replied. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to all philosophical questions. "Like how I interrupted your company, but now we're family?" "Exactly like that," Robert smiled, squeezing her hand. "The very best interruption I could have asked for." As they walked on together, Robert Thompson, still a CEO but now, more importantly, a father, knew with certainty that the life he had once thought perfect had been missing its most vital piece. The little girl whose arrival had seemed so disruptive had actually made everything whole. And in that wholeness, both father and daughter had found something neither had fully experienced before: the simple, profound joy of belonging to each other.